the year that everything was crashing and cutting and laying off, and so.
Are we being recorded?
Yes, we are live. All right.
Okay, let me just cover up my food. Sorry, I didn't realize that.
Burbank, California.
Good evening, everybody. It is Monday, August 15th. This is a special session of City Council this evening. We are here to do a review of Plan Ferndale, our draft master plan that is going through the public process now. I think public comment ends this week, and this document is getting ready to come to City Council in September for approval. So tonight is just a study session by council to make sure we ask questions and dive deeper into what's changing policy-wise and what's new and what's fading away type of questions. So with that, I invite you to join me in welcoming us to the meeting just by taking some mindfulness moments, taking a couple breaths. Let go of whatever happened today on your Monday at work. Take another breath. Exhale. And come to our community meeting here in discussion with open-mindedness and warmth and compassion for everybody who's put so much time and energy into creating a fantastic master plan update. This is definitely a community-driven plan with lots of volunteers and resident voices designing how we move forward over the next 5 years. And so one last cleansing breath. And exhale and shake it all out. With that, we're going to stand up and do the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America,
To the republic for which it stands, one nation,
under God,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, Mr. Clerk, can we have roll call, please?
Mayor Pro Tem James.
Here.
Member Leaks May.
Here.
Mikulski.
Here.
Polika.
Here.
And Mayor Piana.
Here. And next up is the approval of the agenda.
I move that we accept the agenda as presented.
Second. Moved by Polika, seconded by Mayor Pro Tem James.
Polika.
Yes.
James.
Yes.
Leaks May.
Yes.
Mikulski.
Yes.
Piana.
Yes. So the bulk of our conversation and council agenda tonight is going to be number 4, which is presentation, which is the Plan Ferndale City Council study session. There will be call to audience at the end of the entirety of the presentation and question and answer period between council and staff. There are no decisions being made tonight, no motions, no approvals of anything. It's just for council here to get more information and ask questions, because this is a very lengthy document to get through. And we wanted this conversation to be public so everybody heard what our questions were and where we are in the process of developing this policy document for the city. So with that, I am going to invite up our Community Economic Development team, who's kicking this off with our study session with a presentation. Hi there.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Christine Ross. I'm the project planner with the City of Ferndale. I was up here a few months ago to authorize the distribution of the draft plan for a 63-day public review period. It was originally 42 days, and then we took a step back and extended it to 63 days. So that public review period ends tomorrow, July 16th. And so tonight we are just here. August 16th, thank you. So we are just here tonight to go over where we've been, where we're going, some differences between the last plan 5 years ago in 2017 and this plan, and then to go over some of the feedback that we received. So we have our consultant, Kathleen Duffy, here from Smith Group, and she will be leading this presentation, and CED staff will also be here to help answer any questions.
Welcome, Kathleen. It's good to see you again.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. So it's been over a year since we started working on this update to the plan, which, as we went along, became more of a full rewrite than just a pure update. So that's hence the extending the review period to 63 days. And I hope we made it easy for you to get through the document. Yes, it's long. Yes, there's a lot of stuff in there, but we wanted to give all the pages room to breathe and have plenty of diagrams to try and explain all the big topics. So as Christine said, we're going to go over some of how this plan relates to your previous plan. And we've narrowed down some of the comments that we're going to talk about with Planning Commission on Wednesday. We want to get your feedback on one of them just to confirm that we handle things appropriately as written in the plan from comments that we've received during the public review period. So just a quick reminder that Plan Ferndale encompasses 3 updates. So we've already updated the Parks and Rec plan, which was adopted in January to be eligible for DNR funding. And this new master plan also incorporates a climate action plan. So not only is climate action its own chapter in the plan, but it's woven throughout the entire Plan Ferndale document to make sure that we're thinking about resilient and decarbonization focused actions in all the other sections as well. Because the Parks and Rec plan was adopted in January, we've prepared a forward to fully align the Parks and Rec plan now that we've caught up with the master plan. So it just includes some final references of where things related to Parks and Rec can be referenced in the bigger Plan Ferndale document itself. So the plan was built on 3 main components using public feedback. We've received a lot of participation despite preparing this during a pandemic, and we'll update these numbers with the final tally after we go through all the comments received during the public review period. But as it stands in the draft plan that you have, this is what we've been hearing, and some of the biggest topics, unsurprisingly, are discussed around affordable housing and mobility, thinking about how best to preserve green space, and again, being resilient in the future. So not only did we have robust public engagement, but we also updated the data based on the recently released 2020 decennial census and some estimates from the American Community Survey. So looking at that data is particularly in the climate action plan to help the city set forth targets for reducing carbon in the next 10 to 15 years. And we also built, like I said, the plan on your previous master plan. So the previous plan adopted in 2017 still was very useful to many of us during the process, and we borrowed and used as much language as we could as it still made sense, but a lot had been accomplished since then. And one of the pieces, as we started to look at the plan, which we talked about with you last fall at our joint session with the Planning Commission, was the idea of expanding the values beyond these 4 of progressive, equitable, sustainable, and resilient, adding a few more values, but also shuffling around the chapters, the plan elements of it, to be more thematically related, but to also how do we then integrate the climate action plan and to make more measurable and specific actions and outcomes. So as a result of that, we looked at your strategic plan as a council, we looked at the housing plan, Ferndale Moves, and sorted through all the different values that were emerging through each of those plans and came up with 4 new guiding principles or values: inclusive, healthy, thriving, and connected. And we integrated more from your strategic planning document and those other documents as well into what we're calling the plan vision elements. And our hope is that these elements will set a grounding set of common goals and objectives that go beyond just the land use plan, as it has been called in the past, into an overarching framework that can be adapted as subsequent plans and studies happen. And in each of those broader 3 sections, we then have goals, objectives, outcomes, and actions related to each of their topics. So when we looked at those now 8 guiding principles, one thing that we charged ourselves with doing was writing a statement for each of those guiding principles at the beginning of each of those 3 main vision element chapters, to make sure that there was a policy statement that you could take as a city, to make sure that when you're thinking about the context of those chapters and decisions made under each of those 3 bigger, broader vision headings, understanding what these values and how they're defined more directly related to those 3 topics. So I mentioned these vision elements as kind of being the overarching thematic chapters of the plan. So they're really pointing towards the future and the vision, setting up those goals and objectives, and that is likely to hopefully not change too much in the next few years, but we hope that the action taken under your land use chapter, climate action and implementation chapter will change. Those are more of the guiding documents to use to get stuff done in the next few years, and will likely be more thoroughly amended the next time you update your plan. So to sort of show where sections were shuffled from the previous plan, we included a lot of the, like I said, bits and pieces, but moved things around a bit. But you'll see that under people and systems in particular, there are a lot of new sections. And these were based on a lot of the feedback we heard from the public, but also from you as a body and Planning Commission and our steering committee about what was most important to folks in Ferndale, and being very specific about stating those facts. So while not traditionally in land use plans, we're always broadening how we look at those as guiding comprehensive plans for setting a policy for the future. So having somewhere for you to point to that explains how, first and foremost, Ferndale is known for its citizens and its people and its place. So getting that out right up front to set the stage for why it's important to regulate things related to land. And the systems chapter relates heavily into the climate action plan as well, just pulling up some of those kind of sustainable and resilient actions of city systems into its own chapter. So for people, we have the topics listed here. I'm not going to read each of these overarching goals, but each of them relates back to people with community identity, livability, civic engagement, arts and culture, and health and well-being. And place encompasses more of the physical side of things, with housing, economic vitality, built environment, parks, open space and environment, and accessibility and connectivity. Here we wanted to really prioritize some of those topics that got a little lost, like accessibility and connectivity, trying to be even more overt with how we're addressing those as topics for people of all abilities in the city. And then, like I mentioned, systems, so adding a section on energy, explaining up front why we're trying to decarbonize the city and what that would mean for the average resident. Water, waste, transportation, which pulls a lot from Ferndale Moves. And then communication. This gets into both having a transparent process and a back and forth between city government and the residents, but also starts to think about more of emergency management type things and hazard mitigation to relate back to Oakland County's hazard mitigation plan. So the first of our implementation kind of action focused chapters is land use, and we added this diagram up front to explain that land use isn't just about how the land is used. It's really about the intensity of use, how well things are fit with their neighbors and are compatible, the impacts of mobility and systems and infrastructure on those land use decisions, and again, really being specific about the idea of being a welcoming community and planning for neighbors and the people that live here. So this kind of sets the stage for that chapter. The land use map future land use map has not changed dramatically. Just a couple key things to point out is we split out the industrial categories into industrial 1 and 2 to more closely align with what things are zoned right now, just because there is a heavy industrial category and we don't necessarily want that heavy industrial creeping into the light industrial areas, so that darker purple is the more heavy, and that was the reason for adding that. and just clarifying a couple things based on the latest happenings in the Hazel site down at the bottom left, more reflecting of what that's likely to be, and clarifying the mixed-use nature of West 9 Mile. It had been just a residential category, but it's zoned mixed use now, and we thought that made sense to be that in the future. That's really it from an actual mapping standpoint of what's changed. But we did get into a lot more of the detail about what those different place types mean. We tried to reframe the future land use to provide more specificity. The previous plan just had little paragraphs that pretty thoroughly described what should happen in those, but we turned them into tables to be very specific about how each of those different components, systems, and how in each land use you can think more about character and being innovative along the lines of resilience and sustainability, but also opportunities for housing. So the community housing action plan, the KHAP, for me not remembering the acronym right now, outlined some specific policies that we wanted to incorporate into the future land use plan. And the biggest change is was looking at where existing attached residential units exist and providing a new policy direction to allow up to 3 units in all residential districts. So there's already a scattering of many multiple units across the residential zoning districts. And so for an equitable approach, this doesn't mean that every single property within city limits will turn over into something that is not single family, but it gives people the option. There's already a lot of mixture of uses throughout the residential neighborhoods, and this just permits what's already there, and it allows people to have some flexibility. So this could mean single home has 2 units in it moving forward, or it gives people the opportunity to add an accessory dwelling unit to their single family unit. And it basically would allow for a duplex and an accessory dwelling unit on every lot. Now, practically speaking, that's not going to be physically possible in some areas where the lots are small, but it gives people the option and it gives the flexibility. And this is a pretty bold step, but I think it's one that we heard loud and clear from the public that they're ready for, especially in relation to the housing action plan, to blanketly change zoning in the future. This doesn't mean that with the adoption of this plan that any of these things are changing now. There will still need to be rezonings, but this would permit people to potentially submit themselves to be rezoned, or the city to contemplate future rezoning in the future. This is just a land use plan for the future that provides some guiding policy documentation, but again, not changing the zoning as it stands right now.
Through the chair, we didn't really cover, did council want to take questions through the presentation, or did you want to receive the presentation and follow?
I think that it's appropriate to ask questions along the way. I have a follow-up question on that. I know the master plan is not the regulatory document that changes zoning, but zoning will need to be updated to reflect the policies in the document. So the Planning Commission would be undertaking a review after this approval of the master plan in order to bring alignment in the zoning ordinance to match this document, correct?
Yeah, but with that, it doesn't necessarily mean that the Planning Commission needs to proactively rezone everything to align with the master plan. They can choose to allow things to be applied for if they wish in a more passive way. Well, you would be the final approval body of a zoning amendment, but we see many communities that allow a more gradual transition too, so it just depends on how forward thinking you want to be in terms of the city initiating any rezonings or initiating those zoning changes that would affect districts, or you may choose to only update one district at a time and see how it goes. But yes, it sets the stage for future zoning amendments and provides some flexibility there to grapple with more of the details at the Planning Commission level as a next step.
Okay. Any other questions at this point? I do want to mention Councilman Polika is on the planning commission as the council rep, so I know you've been through this extensively already, and multiple times, so your insights and things like that is most appreciated throughout this.
Sure.
Great. So this, the new goals for your climate action plan, I think you've probably seen versions of these before. We presented preliminary versions of these back in September of last year. These are very ambitious goals, and it's going to take a lot to get there. I am relatively optimistic based on the recent federal legislation that was passed that will help us in a lot of ways in all of the individual municipalities in meeting these goals. But it's going to take a lot of effort on a lot of individuals, but the city as a whole, and where the city has the ability to make decisions to reduce our carbon emissions. So looking at both how we can try and encourage residents, both existing and future residences that are built to comply with stronger building standards, changing how we think about appliances that we put in, being more electric than gas powered, and looking at the fleet, both the city fleet, but also the entire city's modes of transportation, changing to alternative forms, whether it's scooter, e-bike, transit, carpooling, electric vehicles, all of those things together will help the city make those, these ambitious goals a reality. Any questions on climate action that I can attempt to answer?
Through the chair, through the public comment period, was there any expression of willingness or interest to fund these improvements? Because these are all increasing the cost of service, right? The 80%, goal number one, to effectively do that would be through the city's facilities, which is our biggest imprint through the GHG. So that's a resource, right? And so is there any public understanding or expression of interest about that?
We didn't explicitly ask that, but there was overwhelming support for finding alternatives, whether that be alternative fuel sources or energy sources, I should say, and looking at some alternative options to traditional private suppliers. But also, all of this goes beyond just the cities. All of these have to do with just the city as a whole, lowercase c, the city, that within the boundaries of Ferndale, reducing all of this stuff. So we didn't explicitly ask, I don't think. Don't quote me on that. We need to look at the results of the resilience survey that we did to see specifically, but I would say there was overwhelming support for working on things. Many of the public comments that we've received during the review period have been oriented towards that, things that they can do in their own homes. And so I think utilizing the Environmental Sustainability Commission to help both educate and support homeowners in retrofitting and things like that are for sure a top priority that the public expressed an interest to.
I just want to say, these are the ambitious goals were helped set by ICLEI, which is the Race to Zero program, which is what this council signed on for. But by signing on, we also get support from ICLEI to help measure our greenhouse gas emissions over time. And I'm all about positioning the city to be eligible, more eligible for grant funds. And I'm of the opinion that the city will be more eligible for funding because we actually have a climate action plan that would be adopted by council. But to me, overall, you know, it is ambitious. A lot of these are, you know, the intensity of energy supplies. Like, we need DTE to help. We need consumers' energy to help as well. And so if the city doesn't hit the numbers by 2030, we'll know by 2025, 2026, and can start saying, hey, partners, we're, you know, behind on meeting these goals because these are things are out of our control. And we said we've needed partnerships. Where else can we leverage funds, partnerships, federal funds, state funds? So to me, it's a conversation leveraging point to continue to make progress. Because, you know, I sometimes like, wow, these are really ambitious. How do we overcome this, given our budget limitations and constraints as well?
And I would encourage partnerships with neighboring communities that are undertaking the same process. So Royal Oak just adopted their first sustainability and climate action plan, and there is benefit in putting leverage on utilities when you have multiple municipalities looking at that. Ann Arbor is looking at their first publicly not funded, but publicly run, switching to a publicly run utility as well, so that they can have more control over the source of energy. So there's a lot of emerging partners across the state to work with towards meeting these. This is by far the biggest change in your plan, brand new section. So finally, the implementation plan is much more robust than your previous plan. The previous plan was mostly just an action plan, and we wanted to provide guidance and outline the process of how decisions are made. I think this was a recurring theme throughout the process that we wanted to drive home, both with the public but also with all of the steering committee and partners who helped create the plan, that understanding that the master plan is really a living document that helps guide decision making at all levels of government, but that it starts with the public's input on things, and providing several new diagrams in here and trying to make it easy for people to understand how government works. I think we sometimes take that for granted, those of us that are very close to it. And so knowing how plans become regulations and development occurs, and trying to provide some resources for the city to be not only transparent on that, but to provide some guidance for future decision making so that people understand where and why decisions are being made. As part of that, we set some of it up in the introduction chapter here on the left, but then threaded it through the plan to the end to explain how the public is part of the process and how you as a decision-making body function with the other commissions and boards and plans. So trying to really, again, to describe this balancing act, that all of these different processes inform one another, and how the city decides to spend its resources, but also respond to things when they are brought to you for decisions. And one piece of this is the beginning of something. I don't want you to think of this as being a set in stone portion of your plan, but we started a decision-making checklist for you. We took each of the guiding values, guiding principles here, and wrote some bullet points that can be used by any decision-making body in the city to, or the public, to have some accountability towards why certain decisions are being made. It doesn't mean that it has to meet every single one of these, but it's about those trade-offs and balancing act and trying to quantify in a qualitative way, I would say, to give some of those kind of benchmarks for when something comes along, is it meeting what the plan has outlined as key priorities? And so this is based on a couple of other resources and some of what we heard throughout the process, but there's some guidance in the plan to use to take this a step further. It could become more of a scorecard to evaluate certain types of projects in the future if you decide to go that route. And then finally, the action plan. This is where we've listed all the recommendations that come from the plan, many of which are left over from the previous plan that have just been kind of reorganized. And once we get through the adoption process here, we will format it so it looks better than this. It's just in an Excel document right now because we know that there's likely edits to this. So I would encourage you to look at those and see if our time frame and priorities are on target. And we hope that this will serve similarly to your last action plan, where the planners come to you annually and give you an update on where we stand and what the priorities are for the future and where we've made progress. So with that, I just wanted to give a quick overview of what we've heard through the public, just one particular topic. So before I get into that, I guess, are there any other questions about the plan as a whole? We can do it now or after I go through a couple more slides. or discussion or whatever.
I'd like to hear a little bit more about the decision-making checklist,
Sure.
how that came to be, and because I look at some of these check marks here, the goal was not to hit all of them,
Right.
right? Because
Right.
not every project hits all of these.
Yep.
And so if this decision-making checklist is put into operations, right, from the master plan, whether it's the planning commission, do they start it first? Does the staff start it? I don't know, it seems subjective, as is all, a lot of development is subjective and objective at the same time.
Right.
So it just, I like it, and I like that it asks clear, concise questions, but I just wanted to see, right? It is just, because it's up to council, if it comes to council, if it's not administratively approved, that council has a better idea of like the high level hit points
Yes.
that a
Exactly.
project is hitting on. Is that the intent?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So there's a lot of narrative, it's page 138 of the plan in chapter 7 in implementation, and there's a lot of accompanying narrative. So yes, not all decisions can meet all of these guiding principles and priorities equally. I think the intent is to just not prioritize one over the other, right? To have a balance. And often decisions can be made in a silo sometimes. I'm not accusing you of doing that. I'm just speaking in broad generalizations here. And so just making sure it's kind of like a gut check as big decisions come forward, whether it's a big, redevelopment of a site or a big change to one of your roadways. Are we kind of doing a gut check as a body? And I think, again, what we were trying to give was a tool, a resource that translates the plan into actual policy making tools, so that it's not these abstract, like, here's a goal, we want to do this, trying to bring that down to the level of, is it supporting on all of these principles that have been kind of incorporated throughout the plan.
And through the chair, just for clarity, are these principles that residents said were important to them, or are these just?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, and our extrapolation based on what people were saying was important, and tying it back to the previous plan's recommendations, and again, building off a couple of other resources that are in the footnote down there too, from APA, American Planning Association, and the Twin Cities Equitable Development Scorecard. Just to give a frame of reference, I guess. Again, it's not a quantitative thing at this point. It's just for you to begin to test to see if something like this might help. Again, guide that kind of conversation and transparency, so that people understand why certain things are being supported.
Yeah, I like the powerful questions, like, did we get the change we expected? I think, down the road. And one of your inclusive checkpoints on page 5 of implementation, chapter 7, the last one says, continue to engage the public after the plan or project is completed. Can you expand a little bit more on that? Usually the city moves on and we don't have a lot of resources.
Yeah, so I think that particularly is just seeing how things are going. So whether it's providing updates on, hey, we've had this many people use our new parking deck. We're reevaluating, we're recalibrating our process based on some data. I think it's as much about communicating the success of the project or how changes have been made, so that there's an understanding of, again, why. I think we heard a lot through the process that people aren't always aware of how decisions are made, and to keep the conversation not just solely as in an upfront way, but also understanding the impacts of things. So it's not necessarily like spending more budget or more staff time on things, but just communicate. It's more of a communication tool at that point, or doing a follow-up survey, or just field checks, spot checks, conversations with residents. Is this what you expected when we were planning this redevelopment, or how could we have done things differently? That sort of conversation.
Yeah, I could see how that might be helpful.
Right.
If I looked at the DOT project, a lot of the business owners were very skeptical, and
Right.
and a lot of them are very supportive now, and I'm glad it's there. Maybe not so much the residents, but in certain areas.
Right.
Okay.
I don't know, Mayor, I haven't heard any complaints from the residents.
Any other questions? We can definitely circle back.
Can you talk a little bit about the arts and culture new section, some of the new areas that were added?
Yeah.
And I also know that the input from the Accessibility and Inclusion Commission, it was formed to help guide policy.
Right.
And, they help update the Ferndale Moves Plan, and that was adopted in 2021. But there is a clear presence and position in this master plan about accessibility and inclusion. So can you kind of go over that a little bit, what the intentions are?
Yeah, we had representatives both on the steering committee, but then we forwarded the drafts to the Arts Commission, or is it Beautification, Arts and
Culture?
Culture Commission, and the Accessibility Commission to provide feedback before it officially went to Planning Commission. Just to make sure that we were incorporating any other language that came out of their groups. And so when it comes to arts and culture, I think it was, again, something that can be hard to measure, the amount of art in a community, but wanting from what everyone, when we asked people during the community summit to define the character of Ferndale, it was evident, and I think it's evident to many of us who don't live here, how important that is to the community, and so highlighting it as a goal with some commitment to try and support art in all of its forms, both physical art that is, whether it's public art that rotates throughout the community, but also performance art and things like that. That's very important to the people that live here, and how can we provide opportunities for that throughout public spaces, but also on the first floor of retail spaces downtown. How can they be encouraged to have rotating exhibits, things like that, like thinking beyond just public art that is a fixed sculpture that moves around, but thinking about temporary installations and supporting what has clearly been a very artistic community for a long time. So I think it was as much about just lifting that up so that there's not a ton of meat in the chapter, that I think will have more of what the Arts Commission and Culture Commission is working on. They're working on a census of local artists and just getting started on some policy initiatives. So this also just gives them space to explore how else they can help encourage art in public places, but in private places as well. And definitely playing up the cultural aspect of things as well, especially as such an inclusive community. We thought it was important that culturally, how can we showcase people of varying backgrounds, and it contributes to that idea of welcoming as well. That we welcome all types of people, and demonstrating that with arts and culture is, very important to residents. It's definitely something we heard loud and clear from feedback.
I noticed in the implementation of this section for arts and culture, there's a lot of key partners that aren't listed for the action items.
Great, tell us who they are. We asked it many times and tried to get some answers and didn't always.
Yeah, and I know some of these are guiding, and vision intentions, but like leverage art and trades for education and skills training opportunities. Our city doesn't have a skills training department and/or like, that one's really unclear to me. That's how I would operationalize that as, in my role as mayor through our budgeting process, given that we don't do training opportunities. So I think there's some things in here that are really good, interesting ideas worth exploring, but when I read them, I don't understand what the intentions were from the feedback of residents, right? Leverage arts and trades for education and skills training opportunities. To me, that seems like that would be something with the school district.
I think that one was from your old plan, but yes, the school district would be key in that.
Right, and I know that some of these came up, like the one's been in there for the last 5 years about encouraging this, it said something to the effect of engage or create a safe routes to school program. But technically, the school district needs to lead that because they have to be the lead applicant on any grants in order to become a safe routes to school. I mean, the city can only encourage, we can't actually lead. And so I think, you know, being very clear on what your verbs are up front in terms of taking action is where I'm looking for clarity, where we would need to. So
Yeah, that one, for instance, we say encourage school district participation.
yeah, I mean, yes, because I said
Right.
I can't achieve this.
Right.
I can't achieve this in my role as council because I can't make them become a safe routes to school entity. I've asked, but it's up to them to decide where and how to leverage that program. But yeah, I can give you some feedback, and maybe council has some on their own time of 2.1 through 2.9, just to give some direction to staff.
That'd be
Since
great.
this is a brand-new section in the master plan, I think this is where council could really be helpful. Since our residents have prioritized arts and culture, or at least being elevated and more prominent in our master plan. And then finally, I know that we've had residents ask before, you know, create a arts and cultural department, but we're just not that big of a city to create that. That doesn't mean we can't make small investments here and there in arts and culture. You know, I'm just really interested in exploring how to make progress on these. Particularly, there's a lot of short-term ones here. And short-term is 1 to 2 years, right? And if I recall, our last CED director, when we updated the last master plan, and how many activities did they have from the
Over 115.
They had over 115 action items from the master plan. And so I'm very conscientious now of how many of these are gonna fall in the CED department and how many of them are short-term. So if there could be, I know you guys put everything here in the Excel spreadsheet, but if you guys could give us a survey of how many action items, again, fall on one department, and particularly which ones are new, that would be helpful for me to just understand expectations of delivery.
I think that's deliverable for staff. Staff can probably analyze that
Great.
and
Yeah.
give a general.
That doesn't, yeah, that's not Kathleen or Smith Group, but that is something I am looking for as part of your final presentation to council. How many fall in the CED, how many fall Parks and Rec? Because there's so much climate in here, there's a lot more that fall on DPW, right? Than previously, because there was never this type of chapter in there, so. And what really is expected and realistic over a 1 year to 2 year short-term plan. That's going to drive budget decision-making going forward and prioritizing during our strategic planning sessions of where we leverage funds and then where do we go after grant funding in order to make progress. Because my overall, I mean, I love this plan. I think it's great. I love that it's more everyday plain language. And I love that you have the standard mission vision and those people, places, systems, like those things don't change much,
Theoretically,
right? But everything else under that changes over time. I really love how you guys sort of set that up.
Thanks.
Through the chair, if we have a moment, could we circle back to slide 15 and 16?
Sure.
For a quick clarification here. Within the future land use slide on, I think it's slide 15, is there a reason that we wouldn't have park by the Kulik Center identified as open space? Is it just because the zoning is traditional residential for that lot?
That is the next thing I wanted to talk about. And get your opinion on what it should be.
Then on slide 16, I think this might just be an error. Under proposed land use place types, it looks like the lighter blue is downtown and the darker blue is.
You're right, that's flipped.
Okay.
Yep.
Where is that? Can you say that again, please?
Just the key.
It's slide 16, the key for proposed land use place types. The lighter blue is downtown, and that identified the Livernois corridor and.
Ah, yes, yep, good catch.
Let me just give you the quick overview of how the planning department's been out there getting feedback, and then that's the one thing we wanted to talk about was Kulik and what the facilities task force is working on and how that shows up on. So we've been out there on social media with a variety of posts and trying to direct people to the discussion board, but also lawn signs out and out at meetings and events to get the word out about the draft plan, and again, trying to direct as many people as we can to the discussion board where there's been some lively discussion. These are all the different events that staff has staffed, so getting things out there during the summer so that people know that how their input has been used to date. And so through that, we've created a list of comments received and gone back and forth with staff and us on our suggestions, and many of them we're going to go over with the Planning Commission on Wednesday. But the one that we really wanted to talk with you about tonight was designating open space on the future land use plan, and then specifically what to say about the Kulik Center. So I'll start by saying that in some plans, we don't even call out open space as a thing. It just becomes part of the neighborhood designation because we hope that all neighborhoods have some level of both publicly held and privately held green space, and we write it into the definition of those neighborhoods anyway. And in this case, there are some immovable ones that seem to be priorities for the Parks Department to maintain in the future, or things like the cemetery that are not going to change. There was no real deliberate intent here to exclude that, but it also doesn't preclude the Kulik Center from remaining as it is and as a green space in the future, just by nature of its designation being this traditional residential category, because as you see here, it's a permitted use in all of the districts. There were some comments related to why it was shown as different things in the Parks and Rec plan and in the future land use map of this draft plan, and that's simply because it's a draft and we're trying to figure out what it should say. And we're a little bit at the mercy of the Public Facilities Task Force, and we're awaiting their conclusions, but we're likely to adopt this before they're done, and so would offer up your suggestions, and we'll be asking this question to Planning Commission on Wednesday as well, of what to say. What color should it be? It can be shown as any of these. But yeah, it could be shown as open space, but it could be shown as traditional residential as well, allowing anything under that category to also, which includes public recreation as a use to happen there. And the intent is to include the updated future land use map in that forward to the Parks and Rec plan that fully aligns the Parks and Rec plan with this plan Ferndale as it's adopted. So also this comment, so a couple different comments on more information needs to be provided on what will happen to the Kulik Center. So again, we were kind of taking a passive approach to that and waiting for the facilities task force. So would love your thoughts and comments on what makes sense for this location.
Through the chair, I can just give the timeline update.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
You're correct. This will preclude the task force's final report. I expect that will be in drafting phase in September. And so I expect the task force to present their findings likely in October or November. Comment on the open space. Since this is a master land use plan, I personally only comfortable with a map reflecting open space if the site's city property under city control. That's really the only way we can dictate it being open space, and this is not our property. So I'd be concerned about misleading the public. That's not our property, and I wouldn't want to convey that we can have a right to do that. I think we could have language to encourage the school district to preserve it for open space. But I'd feel concerned about adopting that and conveying it that it is open space.
And through the chair, if I could add on, Kate Baker, who is in the audience, can probably confirm with me, but historically, we have always treated school property as residential, zoned residential, including any green space that they may have. So if you look at Coolidge, they have a park there with playground, but all of it is considered residential. If you look at where Taft was, they had a separate playground from our park area, but all of that was identified as residential, zoned residential. And so historically, we've just kept that in that manner. So Kulik is the same thing. It's still owned by the school district. It's still considered a school. And therefore, all the property is zoned as R1, like we do Coolidge. Like we did Wilson, they also had a playground right behind. So it's just consistency.
If I may, through the chair, I don't know, maybe I've missed this, but I thought that at some point it wasn't certain as to that green space at Kulik, whether it was the schools or the cities. It is the schools, the green space?
Yes.
So the park area is also the schools?
Yes.
The whole area, the parking space, all of that is the schools?
Yes, there's two lease,
Okay.
there's two
Different
lease
leases.
agreements,
Yeah.
two lease
Okay.
agreements, one for the property and one for the green
Playground.
space.
Okay.
In conversations that Councilwoman Mikulski and I have had in terms of land negotiations, I don't know, last year, the school district did say that they were committed to keeping it a green space on the existing footprint of the green space. So I think there's common values and shared values here, but further conversations need to be had.
Further through the chair, I'm sorry, I don't know if you touched on that, but with the Parks and Rec Master Plan, because we currently have the lease with the Kulik Center, we can program that space. So in the master plan for the parks, we've kept it green because, we're able to program, utilize that space because it is currently under our management. But if that were to change in 2, 3, 5 years, the next master plan would have to reflect that we wouldn't have that control if the school takes back the land or whatever happens.
So through the chair, what is the purpose of the future land use plan? What is the intention of it? Is it a zoning plan? Is it a vision plan? I'm just not clear on what role does it serve? Because in my mind, when I looked at it and I first saw the open spaces, I thought that was sort of our vision for what it's going to be, not just a reflection of the zoning, with the exception of the cemetery. Cemetery confused me. Not playing on the cemetery.
I hear that.
Through the chair, Councilwoman, I think you're right. It's a planning tool, which in part or in more than part perhaps may guide future regulations through and the legal statutory changes potentially to the zoning ordinance. But it's a planning tool to help guide the direction of city staff and council going forward for a period of time.
If I may, the Planning Enabling Act requires that any community that has a zoning ordinance have a future land use plan. So its original intent per the state act is to guide zoning decisions in the future. It doesn't mean that it can't be more than that, though.
With that in mind, it feels wrong to just label it as open space. Open space doesn't mean anything from like a zoning perspective, or does it?
You do not currently have an open space zoning district, no.
Okay. Would it be, is there such a thing as parks space?
That's a use in your use table, in your zoning ordinance. Yes, would be public recreational and park use is a use that would fall under many districts. Also, there's a couple things that I think, it's both what color is it on the map, but it's also what we say about it. And I think we tried to walk that fine line of we're waiting for the facilities task force in the text itself, and didn't feel comfortable making a hard and fast statement on that, pending those results. So it's mentioned somewhere else. I'd have to look here in my plan to figure out what page it's talked about, but.
This might be a Joe question. We currently have programming associated with the park at the Kulik Center. Is that correct?
Playground, and I think summer camp no longer does actually utilize it. I think they've shifted over to Martin Road.
I guess my big concern is, again, there are two parks that I know of within the southwest quadrant here that are not identified as green space. And one is the Kulik Park, one is the little tiny pocket park down on, I think that's on Bowfield.
Or Tot
Yeah. And it just leaves that section of town very much with a gap. And it's a green space. I know the residents are concerned about that, and I feel like the map in its current format does not send the message that we're protecting that green space for them.
Would the Marie Tot lot, because that's like a parcel, isn't it? It's teeny tiny. But that still merits a green dot of some sort.
It's part of the park system.
Yeah, I mean, Schiffer's not designated here either, even though that's a teeny tiny
park as well. So is that something the planning commission can take a look at? Because they would be the ones to help reflect that in the map, right? Through Kathleen.
Yeah.
Looking at my
We just-
people in the audience who would talk to.
It's just a vestige of your old map.
Yeah. I will direct Greg to represent, Councilman Polika to represent
I
council.
can bring that up.
Yes,
I will.
okay.
Through the chair is associated with parks and open space. And I don't have the full plan in front of me, so forgive me if I'm overlooking this. But is one of the action recommendations to maintain and or expand park and open space?
Maintain for sure. I think we were hesitant on expand because I think in the Parks and Rec that gets a little like their ability to manage anymore. It's more about increasing tree canopy and green space holistically, not necessarily more park space from an operational standpoint. It was my recollection in the Parks and Rec plan.
So expounding on that, though, you could apply that towards this district to Laura's point. Laura's point, if there's a deficiency of green space in this area, that could be a general strategy of the master land use plan to,
Fine.
Formalize it.
that would be also preserving, because that would be a goal, right? To preserve that.
Yeah, preserve the Marie Chat lot.
And I think that would accurately reflect what you're saying. That would be a goal.
Yeah, I can support that.
And I will bring that up. I'll bring up your concerns and your inquiry at Wednesday's meeting. Sure.
The Kulik Center footprint is still a little sticky. I think that needs to be, because we don't own that property. But making zoning changes, we would just need to talk to the school district, I think. I wouldn't want to surprise them.
Through the chair, this isn't a zoning change, correct? It's already R1?
R1, yeah.
It was R1 in 2017.
Yep.
And
Okay.
nothing has changed yet
Okay.
since.
Those are great points, though.
I mean, through the chair, I just sort of wanted to add to this discussion that I think it's one thing to sort of, what's the word that I'm looking for? Inventory some of the green spaces that exist in the city, whether or not the city has control over them. Because I know my neighborhood has a similar kind of deficit where, the university high school green space is the only green space in my neighborhood. And I think it's important to inventory it for other planning purposes, whether or not the city has the capacity to expand park space there or in that vicinity is kind of a second phase. But knowing where those green spaces exist for planning purposes, I think is really important. So that we do have a holistic view of the actions that we're taking.
If I may build on that, 2 of the schools were abutted to the parks. Former Taft is next to Garbutt Park. The Kulik is, what other school is it? Wilson, thank you. Wilson is abutted against Wilson Park, but University and Kulik are not. But those green spaces are definitely amenities in the neighborhood. So, used by fly fishermen, kids.
Well, is that something, and this is where I
Dogs.
get sticky with our action items, is that something that we should put into our action item as to preserve the green space, the percentage of green space on those parcels?
That's an interesting idea I think it wanted to be explored, but I also think it's a partnership with schools, because schools don't have to actually follow zoning and can do whatever they want on their properties. But a school district that chooses to do something out of line with the master plan and do so legally, I would say is not taking the neighborhood in consideration when they make those decisions. Even though they're good for the school district, it may not be the best for the neighborhood. So
It
it's
puts
always looks like a
pressure on
partnership.
them. It puts pressure on them to, if we have it as an action item, it does put pressure on them, and it also doesn't get lost from our point of view, because when something happens, we might not be up here.
I think that's an idea that you add it to the list of discussions to the planning commission. And this goes back to them for.
I might add an action that says, inventory and identify informal green spaces beyond the city's parks, or beyond city-controlled property, and then it might be a measurable outcome to preserve or expand the amount of green space. I think we have, I'm trying to find it, I can't find it that fast. I think we say something about tree canopy in the same sort of, that like, that should be, what we should be striving towards is to, increase or expand it as a resource.
I may through the chair. So who's going to introduce these topics to, well, it's not even an introduction, but how are the conversations going to be presented or requested of the schools at this point, since this plan is already kind of flowing?
It's a courtesy conversation. The planning commission is setting guidelines that the council would adopt. But I do think these ideas need to be fleshed out, and what Kathleen has just suggested is a good one in terms of putting down an action and inventory. Because she was saying inventory non-school any property that had green space that was being used by the public in some productive way, right? Whether it's a vacant property, school district.
Non-municipal
Yeah.
property.
Non-municipal property, which is providing value in a green space in some way, right? I think that's a good idea, because we may have tiny properties like the tot lot somewhere where we are unaware that it's being used like that because it's a vacant property or has no building on it. We have undeveloped parcels here and there. There's not a lot, but there are some.
And through the chair, just one more follow-up question, Joe. You said that the property that has the Kulik Center was zoned R1 as of what year?
I think it's reflected as residential in 2017, the last MLUP.
Okay.
I don't think anything has changed.
Was it zoned differently before 2017?
I don't.
It said historically, it's generally R1.
I presume not. Yeah, I think it's just consistent with the neighborhood residential zoning.
And I think zoning practice has evolved a lot in the last decade.
We can confirm that, though.
Good discussion. Is there any other parts of the plan that anybody would like to ask about?
If I may through the chair, Mayor introduced or spoke of the Ferndale accessibility and inclusion.
Oh, yes, thank you.
And I did, and I don't think I heard a response from that. And it's not something that's actually been brought up at the Accessibility and Inclusion Commission meetings recently. So I just would like to know, is there like an update as to the input that you received regarding accessibility and inclusion?
There were representatives from that commission on our steering committee that we asked for help. I don't recall specifically what feedback they gave us.
Gotcha.
And the intention was for each representative on the steering committee to forward it to their commission.
Right. And
It can be a follow-up. If it wasn't shared, that is possible.
Is the accessibility and connectivity of the 3.1 in the action plan, are those identified as coming from that commission, or is it just an overview of all accessibility and connectivity actions?
Specifically in the action plan? You're saying, or in the?
Yeah, 3.1, page 2. Actually, it's, action plan.
It's definitely sprinkled throughout, and we created a couple new sections specific. I think we grouped a lot of those under accessibility and connectivity those actions are mostly transportation related. However, the section, I think it's under people, where we talked about accessibility, as part of its idea of livability. So we talk about livability, the components of livability being affordability, welcoming, and accessibility. And we forwarded that page and would love, and we incorporated what we could from the inclusion, what,
FAIAC.
all the acronyms, Inclusion and Accessibility Commission. And we put some goals in there directly from them. So that's page 29 of the people section. And if there's more that needs to be added, we would welcome questions.
My feedback is that we need to figure out who the key partners are for the ones that don't have key partners in. I heard you say you're looking for direction on that.
Yes.
So if that's something the planning commission and staff can give some input on as well, of who they might be.
That would be great. And changing the time frame too, if needed.
Here, one more thing is jumping out on this map. So if this is our sort of vision map, the Hayes Lemmers lot, which I know you talk about further in the breakdown for the land use plan, got the Hayes Lemmers lot as industrial, and I noted that there was a slide in the land use plan that had this labeled as A and said that it should be redeveloped. I think that's page 104. So again, I'm not sure that I understand the purpose of the map. Are we identifying it as what it is, or are we identifying what we want it to be? And right now, it's a combination of green space and a big old industrial building that's probably going to. So I just want to make sure that that's accurately reflected, because I know there's a lot of concern about the green space there and the forest there, and there is, for better or for worse, a lot of use of that space, even though it's private space. So it's toxic.
That's on our agenda to talk with Planning Commission on Wednesday. This is why we provided specific text to accompany the map, because you can't say all of that nuanced stuff on the map itself. And so there are a couple bullets on 103 related to preserving existing site features, including mature tree stands, the city aiming and partnering with contamination and preserving tree canopy, trying to encourage any redevelopment of it to be sustainable in its design, and site design being cognizant of the surrounding neighborhoods, and being especially related to traffic and things, to be sensitive to that. But that's specifically why we called out these redevelopment sites, many of which were amended from the last plan and some are new. But we adapted that language in that section specifically to try to incorporate those priorities of, as much as we can, preserving green space on a privately held lot. But again, we'll be talking about it with Planning Commission if there's any more direction you want to give us tonight, so we can include that in our conversation with them as well.
Through the chair, my question is twofold. Does this map, the future land use map, take priority over the redevelopment map that we have within the land use chapter 5, page 103? And two, I'd like to see what the resident feedback and the steering committee feedback was concerning that plot A, the Hayes Lemmers lot, just because, again, I hear from residents within my section of town, which that was something that they've provided a lot of feedback on, saying that they would want to see that as a like a dedicated green space rather than a mixed-use green space, like a residential with a little bit of green space inside of it. Does that make any sense?
Again, it comes down to it's a privately held lot, and unless the city wants to purchase it and turn it into green space, I think we tried to walk that fine line of trying to work with the owner in the language. So not one thing takes precedence, it's all a plan and it all works together. And so that's why we provided clarifying language, because you can't literally, like, the colors are one thing, but you can't get into that finer nuance. So that's why it got its own page to be as explicit as we thought we could. And we went back and forth with both the previous planning team and the current, and Joe, to try to come up with language that's as specific as we can based on what folks are saying. We heard loud and clear to keep it as much of it green as we can, and to work with a developer to do that. And I don't have any other context other than what was provided to me to phrase it that way. We heard that and we incorporated the language in there, and it's not that, I don't think that the way that it's depicted on the future land use map is in conflict with what is described on the redevelopment strategies, but if you have suggestions for how to make it stronger, we are open to whatever you want it to say.
Through the chair, since this is a workshop, I'll add the comment. The problem with this specific site, as everyone knows, is the environmental condition. It's prohibitive. And so if the first goal is remediation or cleanup, it's on a state super site. So the public really can't have any interaction with it unless it's cleaned up. And I don't know that you're going to clean it up without development activity, because development activity would trigger a brownfield or a state incentive to help clean it up. So my suggestion is to first consider whether you want to just leave it naturally capped and untouched. Again, it's private property, but the city would be likely asked to support any kind of incentive to clean that up, because it would require massive federal and state incentives, likely, I believe, to actually develop the site.
May I ask a follow-up question? The state and the federal government wouldn't just give money to clean it up to keep it a green space?
I haven't seen a program like that. As it is tied to environmental contamination on private property, that may be an option on public property, but.
Through the chair, would it
Not
be
aware.
something maybe that's part of the climate program that was just passed?
And the city's role would be to support any remediation effort, I think. I don't know the city, we don't have the resources. And I certainly wouldn't want to take on any liability associated with the property.
Through the chair, is it common to have private property cited as something that we have a vision for within a master land use?
I think it goes to the nuance. I think you could express a vision for it, and you could even lean into the desire to have it environmentally restored. And that is, I think, to your point, the nuance. That captures the nuance.
I have a legal question. If we change the zoning to like park space or green space, would the on a private property for this parcel, would the owner have legal recourse to
Well, through the chair,
say that we were leaning towards taking a taking?
yes. That would be a theory for the property owner to explore. Whether that carries the day is a different issue, but you can't take it, the private property owner is entitled to have some utilization of their private property. And so if there's no reasonable expectation for them to be able to realize and utilize it, then there is a risk of a potential inverse taking theory being asserted. But that's very technical and specific. There's still, with respect to the context of the plan can identify a different type of use, because again, that is just a planning tool that would potentially guide future zoning changes.
Yep. I mean, Councilwoman Mikulski, I understand your interest here, and I really do. I think it's a hard balance to strike, and I think I would encourage you to take a look at the description, the language description,
That's right.
and work with staff to see if there's any other nuanced changes that we could do. I think there's interest to clean up the green space as much as possible, but our land use plan on the map is difficult to say we would be a partner with the stakeholders that would be leading the cleanup, state, feds, and/or property owner, if that makes sense, right?
That does, and through the chair, that's why I think I struggle with this.
Yeah.
Because I look at us having a vision for it when we don't want to contribute financially because we don't have the resources for it. And we have this vision for it, and I fear that that sends a message to the property owner that we're eyeballing your property, we want you to take a certain action. We are going to kind of force this by looking at this as a potential residential development. I think that's what I read, that was the sort of vision that was expected over here. And yet it's zoned industrial. And the property owner has expressed several times that he has no interest in redeveloping the forested area. So again, it's just a concern that we're putting a vision out there. I think it sends a very strong message. And the interpretation of that message is left up to residents as well as a property owner.
Yeah, I mean, their parcel is split into two parts, right? Industry for continuing their business operations, and then the green spaces, which is where your interest lies, right? And the residents' interest lies. Again, I think tackling, what page is that?
103.
103 and 104.
I think 103 is the best avenue to make sure that we get the comments correct in there about intentions. And getting some revisions in there.
Is your concern about it saying residential as a potential use? I thought we scrubbed it, but I just found another instance of that at the end of the second paragraph.
There is
It's left over from the old plan. Because down below, we caught it and said that having housing is likely not
Feasible?
So it could be amending that sentence in the end of the last paragraph where it would just be potential uses including light industrial, office, commercial, healthcare, recreation.
This is why we do reviews and have conversations, because it's 282 pages.
It also doesn't need to be listed as a redevelopment site. That was on the table at one point as well, was just scrapping it and not even calling attention to it. But we thought because we heard so much about priorities, that outlining those priorities, especially as it relates to potentially a future PUD, which is likely what would happen to try to encourage them to preserve whatever, then you have more of that, back and forth discussion as a city and a property owner and developer, that having this to point to then would guide your negotiation with them on a PUD agreement.
Through the chair, I favor mentioning it, not taking it out, because, Detroit Axle might not own it forever. Who knows what happens in the future? And I think it does make sense to have some discussion in here, even if it's just capturing what today's community thinks about this space. I'd rather have that memorialized than not.
Right.
Through the chair, to expand on that just little bit. If we remove the residential portion, which throughout this plan, I've seen a lot of talk about affordable housing and the need for densification and residential development. What I've not seen are calls for light industrial, office, commercial, healthcare. I have seen recreation. So I question again why we would include this as a redevelopment site with some of those items identified, like light industrial. But again, this is a huge plan, and there could be aspects of it that I'm missing and just not tying back to those.
Through the chair, was that question concerning where and if the city is looking to expand industrial redevelopment, or?
No, it was concerning the fact that we're keeping in a redevelopment strategy based on the priorities identified. And the priorities are tied to the potential uses. So if we have light industrial, office, commercial, healthcare, recreation, and residential identified, we were nixing the residential. And then I question, do we have priorities for light industrial, office, commercial, and healthcare, particularly within that area?
And when you say priorities, do you mean as in attracting those sectors?
That's a good question. Going back to what she was talking about and why we had this in there, I thought that meant that, yes, that is something that we envisioned for that area. So I guess, again, I'm not super familiar with the master land use plan sort of structure, and if that's something that we are trying to envision for that section based on resident feedback. I have not seen anything that would indicate residents are really excited about light industrial.
I understand. That list, is that just capturing permitted uses?
I think it's left over from the last plan.
Okay. In the spirit of the workshop, again, I'm just going to have a thought experiment. If you got a medical office that was interested and was able to get cleanup incentives through the state to remediate the soil and the PFAS, is that something that you'd want to do, or would you view that as an opportunity that could disrupt the greenscape? And so council might not want to, because right now it's preserved. That might be, that's the thought experiment here. So if this gets adopted and hypothetically you had someone who wanted to redevelop it and had the contacts and the support from the federal government or state to remediate.
It's a great thought experiment.
Yeah,
That's what's going to happen on anything that gets pitched here. Will be have to go through the processes with the city to explore with council feasibility and all of that. My sense of things, it's going to stay this way for a while. It's too expensive to clean up, but be unusable for the public. And if the public's using it because it's green space, but they shouldn't because it's a Superfund site, those are dangerous things to be doing as well, particularly for pets, I assuming, if they eat in. I don't know. So is there a solution here that the planning commission could go back and take in terms of this piece of property, in terms of the math and or zoning? Because right now, we've recommended doing the narrative in that one-page write-up about Hazel Emmerts is to incorporate the recommendation from
Mayor Pro Tem James, of being very clear of what the residents desire now, right?
Knowing very well that there are state, federal partners that are required to do anything to make any changes on parts of this site, right? That is the green space. And whatever would happen would need to be a collaboration and discussions, right? And nothing's gonna move forward just because of the zoning map.
I have a recommendation. It was previously future land use planned mixed use, and through edits, realizing that that might be ambitious, recognizing what you're saying of it being contaminated, the most likely user is going to be industrial. We could not show it as industrial 1 on the map and just say, see, it could just be a box that says see page whatever, knowing that the reason we pulled it out of mixed use is because we didn't think that that had similarities to all of the other areas designated mixed use in the city. The corridors mixed use, which had a clear tie to vertical mixed use that is walkable in nature along corridors. So we could include or create a new category for it too, for future planned unit development that requires, if the industrial designation itself is what's triggering the concern.
Through the chair, does the entire property have to be zoned the same? Because there are different lots there. Can the 8 Mile facing be identified as industrial 1, which includes retail, office, storage units, private recreation, public recreation, research and development, and light industrial? And then that section behind it be zoned mixed use.
Again, we're talking about future land use planning here, so I don't want to use the terminology zoned. We're not rezoning anything.
Understand?
Understand, yeah.
Yes.
So planned, and planned lines do not have to follow the property lines. You, nope. They often do for ease of implementation,
Yeah.
but they don't have to. I'll defer to your attorney on whether he's comfortable with
No,
split.
he said you could do it with the tree line and say,
Yep.
you know, this is where
If you want to tell us,
planning ends.
right, we can show it. However, you could just put a big bubble on it too. And there have been some very fuzzy lines in the past that have required other communities to be more specific with how you draw those lines for that reason. But it doesn't preclude us from subdividing that into chunks for the future land use purposes.
That's a very interesting idea. I think that's something you should take back to the planning commission.
I will do that.
discuss.
We'll add that to our discussion.
I like the idea of adding more flexibility to it, which is what Councilman McCulsky was sort of alluding to, between the two different properties there.
All right. Are there any more questions on this particular parcel property? Is there, I want to redirect to some elsewhere in the plan or discussion item? No, there's a lot in here.
Through the chair, I do have one. Out on the people plan, 38. About, I want healthier and more affordable food choices. There's specific call-outs for community gardens, farmers markets, and healthier food choices. I'm trying to figure out where that would live on our action plan and what that would look like.
Can you say which number it is?
It is,
Page 37,
I believe it's.
very last page of people.
Yeah, it's page 38 of the whole section under Goal 5, Health and Wellness.
Yeah.
And if you go into the action item under people, I believe it's in there too. I know a lot of these are recommendations and intentions, and some of these we just haven't been able to get to.
I don't think it's been incorporated into the action items.
Oh, yeah, it's not in the action items. Back to that. People. Yeah, there isn't an action item for that. I want healthier and more affordable food choices. Farmers markets. Honestly, the farmers market is something that's it's been asked for a decade, 13 years since I've been on council. And I'll just flat out say, we do not have the staff capacity to launch a farmer market. Almost all farmer markets are their own 501c3 nonprofits, led by a whole coalition of board of directors and have funding. And so there have been efforts to try to do it, but when we have a great farmer's market almost a mile and a half away in Royal Oak, and the efforts, we should be supporting our neighboring farmers markets. But that's not to say that we don't focus on community gardens. I mean, that's my opinion, as I've seen what's been trying to get going here. And things like that. So, but healthier food and grocery stores and community gardens we've always been supportive of, and I don't know where that fits in with our open spaces or green spaces.
It looks like that might be under implementation plan. It might be under place. And there's a line item, continue to offer passive recreation opportunities, such as gardening, picnicking, and nature activities to complement the extent and popularity of passive park use.
Yep.
It's kind of related, but I don't know that it fits the spirit of it.
Yeah. I'm not sure there would be an achievable action item there, other than encourage partnerships with or promoting existing farmers markets for that action item in particular. It takes a lot of efforts to organize local farmers to show up on a Saturday to sell their wares, and they need a facility and covered areas to sell their food. So it's a massive undertaking. But I do think there's other less intensive growing collaboratives that could be undertaken, but I'm not sure what role the city would have helping get those off the ground, other than helping find land and providing water and doing what we're doing already with the community gardens. This is not my area of expertise, so this is where I would need some insights and guidance. I'm just sharing my opinion and thoughts.
Through the chair, I'm just kind of thinking out loud, honestly. I know that we have a community garden program, but I don't know whether it's been sort of assessed in, you know, how highly used it is? You know, is it being underutilized? Is it being, or is there such a high demand that we should consider expansion and support? I wonder if there's a little bit of fodder in there to sort of either better utilize or expand or riff off of what we've already got going to, you know, address this a little bit.
Through the chair, the community garden that we have has a plot of land in Martin Road Park. It's its own 501c3. They have a membership, they have dues, everyone is responsible for their little plot of land. I don't know if they've ever asked us for expansion, for more property, but the Ferndale Community Foundation has worked with them. So that's really all I know, but I do know that they're their own 501c3.
That's helpful to know.
Yeah.
It could be an action item, just to support or continue to acknowledge, or, I mean, if you want to make it an action item, there are ways to just make it an ongoing thing rather than an active, create one, if you want.
Through the chair, I guess I have kind of a logistical, practical question. Now that we have a better understanding of how these pieces work together, and I think this is prompting me to do a deeper dive into some of these. Prior to it coming back to us at the second meeting in September, if we have recommendations for, you know, the key partners column or action items that seem to be absent, what's the best way for us to communicate those so that they could be incorporated before it comes back to us?
Providing those kind of markups to planning staff would be great.
When is the planning commission reviewing this?
So there's a public hearing on Wednesday. They don't have to take action that day. We said they could if they were ready to, but they don't have to.
When does the packet go out? It's already gone out. So any changes or comments that council would send would not be included in the planning commission?
Right.
And so was that the intended last meeting for the planning commission to adopt this plan and recommend it for council adoption?
Your Honor, the agenda item, through the chair, currently does not have a specific action item.
Oh, it's further discussion with the planning
Well,
commission.
it kind of leaves it open, but it is a scheduled public hearing with respect to the plan.
Yeah, so we're at the tail end of a very long process, and so council really needs to dive in and review, which is one of the reasons why I wanted this session. Any extension that that the planning commission makes, or it's extended coming to council in September, means that the project is extended. I believe we're ending our budget conclusion with Smith Group in terms of wrapping this up. So our delays impact our budget on this project. So I encourage council to get all of their comments in as soon as possible, preferably by the weekend, so that staff can take it and present it to the planning commission as part of a conversation introduction, if anything major needs to change at the planning commission.
Through the chair, it's my understanding the next planning commission meeting after Wednesday night would be September 7th.
It would be September 7th for the planning commission, would be the last time for them to approve it?
Would be the next scheduled planning commission meeting after it's this Wednesday. planning, meeting where the public hearing is.
All right.
If it didn't take action on Wednesday, the next meeting currently is scheduled for September 7th.
Yeah, so today is the study session. Tomorrow, the public comment period ends. Wednesday is planning commission, so in 2 days. If council has a lot of things they would like to review or would like time to review, I think you have one of the planning commission members there. You could probably articulate that. The planning commission could have approved it on Wednesday, but if you're saying you want to have a comment period to be able to comment, then we could let them know and hear it on the public hearing on Wednesday and continue it till a future PC date. What I'd hate to do is not give you the opportunity, because we're at the tail end, and then when it comes to you, have a bunch of changes. So I'd rather get them on.
Right. The goal is not to have changes. When it comes to council for approval, is a bunch of changes and we send it back through to churn. That's what we want to avoid, right?
I'd also, through the chair, I'd also like to avoid the planning commission to have to continually go through this over and over and over again as well.
Is there agreement from council if you guys, because we've had this now since June in various forms, so I really need council to do their homework and send any comments to staff and maybe CC Greg so that he can best represent your interests by Sunday so that they, no, I'm sorry, your meeting's this week.
Yes.
In 2 days. You guys got 2 days. Sorry, you don't even get the weekend. So I don't know how you fit this in, but that is the courtesy where we are in this timeline, is getting all of your comments in.
But if council really cannot respond and wants additional time, we would go to planning commission on Wednesday, have the public hearing and present it, and say that additional comments will be coming from city council who wants time to address it. We'd have to continue it on to the next meeting.
Yes.
What would council decide?
That was already one of the contingencies, if they weren't ready to adopt it this Wednesday.
Would you like extension from?
I would.
Okay, so council, please give us a deadline and in which order to give council their comments to staff. Final deadline of when. If it's not this week, it would be in 2 weeks or a week and a half.
It is,
If
7th is the next planning commission meeting, so we would need, by the 24th, so that we have enough time to get it in the agenda for the planning commission.
24th would be perfect. That gives us about a week to incorporate any comments council may have into the packet for
Comments or edits, yeah.
the anticipated September 7th meeting. That could change based on Labor Day, and we'll try to get a quorum at the next meeting. It could move around, but that would be a minimum.
Right. Okay,
Okay?
It gives us 10 days.
10 days. I encourage you not to make staff work over Labor Day weekend.
Well, at that point, it'll be my, maybe.
I encourage staff not to make our client or our vendor consultant not
What
to.
I will forward the Excel link to the action table again to staff that they can forward to you so that you can make comments right in the table. That's why we didn't format it yet, for this very reason, because that would be easier than trying to manage a bunch of markups, probably.
All right.
If I may, through the chair, I just have a comment. Well, I noticed that in the beginning of the session, you mentioned, when you mentioned City Hall, you said small c, and I just wanted to know, that tickled me because I know why you did that. Because of the beginning stages of the master land use plan, you kind of had that kind of pounded in you. I remember that, so it was just, I appreciate that you kept that in mind. And, yeah,
We realize that the city government as a whole can't solve everyone's
right.
challenges, and that the city as a body and an entity of people and businesses can all work together.
had 2 hours so far. Good conversation and questioning. Is there anything else on the top of council's mind that you're seeing right
Through the chair, I just want
now?
to, this is more of a comment than anything. I just want to thank the planning staff and Kathleen for hosting this session, because even though I've participated in a number of the public input sessions and we've had some presentation on this at previous council meetings, it has been very helpful to be able to focus on it for 2 hours and kind of get into the meat of it. So I very much appreciate your time.
Yes.
Happy to.
I appreciate council and staff giving up their Monday night as well, the third Monday night of the month, and during the end of summer. So, with that, if there's no questions from council, I was going to move it and open it to public comment. If there's anybody here who would like to make public comment, invite you up for 3 minutes to give comment about anything on the master plan at this time. There will be options to do that at the Planning Commission, and there will be options to do that again when this comes back to the Planning or City Council in September. Date may be changed depending on Planning Commission decision making.
I think on public comment a long time.
Hi.
Hi. Kate Baker, 1615 Beaufield Street. I love it when our mayor and council talk about stuff that I like to talk about.
And Planning
Awesome.
Commission member.
I'm Planning Commission member. So mostly wanted to let you guys know, and I know that Council Member Pollica is taking notes for our meeting on Wednesday, but I've been in communication with Michelle Foster, who's our Planning Commission chair. She'd hoped to be here tonight, ended up working late, so she's not here. But we've been texting. So the couple of big items that have come up, actually we had a neighbor on Hazelhurst come and talk to us about open space as well, and the fact that it's not been a zoning category in the past, and kind of how the thinking around that happened. So that was already on our radar at Planning Commission. But then also to get the direction from you guys, which Michelle says she's comfortable with, so I hope you are as well, Greg, to not do any adoption votes potentially on Wednesday. I'm only one member, Michelle's only one member, but to make sure that the council has another week to give input so that we don't potentially get ourselves into a feedback loop where we send you something that then you kick back to us and all of a sudden we're in November. So I think that was a really helpful suggestion tonight. Thank you, guys. On open space, if I could make one request in advance of Wednesday, our city attorney had a really interesting and helpful insight into the differentiation between the future land use plan, which we had really good conversations about the purpose of that, and our zoning map. I've always been afraid that if we downzone something significantly, we're going to end up in court about it. The difference between outlining a vision for something and actually updating zoning was a really great point that our city attorney made tonight. So if I could make a request to our planning director and our city attorney, I think that might come up in our conversations about open space on Wednesday. So just a little bit more background between perhaps the legal weight that a future land use plan and a zoning map carry when it comes to something like a potential downzoning. And then my last request would be for the mayor and the council. You are going to be seeing some follow-up from your planning department as well as from the planning commission about the next steps. And so that would be a zoning update, potentially a big zoning update. We joked a little bit at the beginning of this meeting about our 2011 zoning update, which was literally written by volunteers because we had no budget, right? So there have been other things kind of cobbled together and updates made since then, including some significant form-based updates for the downtown. But overall, we haven't done a comprehensive zoning update in at least a decade. So our city planning department is really looking at what we've got, working with the Planning Commission to put together a recommendation for council about what we think those next steps are and how much we think that might cost. So I'm just letting you know that that's coming. We hope that you'll support it. It will be really important to codify some of the things and visions that we've put into this future land use, future land use plan, and future land use map in particular, in order to move them forward and make them reality, we got to make them realistic in our zoning as well.
If I may, through the chair. Kate? Now, you mentioned that we mentioned that we should get our comments to Councilman Polika and to
And to Roger, I believe.
Roger.
You want to go to Roger?
Okay, just wanted to make sure, okay. To Roger? Okay.
But if you copy a council member on it, I mean, he is your representative at Planning Commission, right?
Okay,
So,
all right.
Greg is always the person that I call, so for updates on the task force or other things, some of these hot questions that you guys talked about tonight, I always go to Greg first because he's our representative. So making sure that some of your land use stuff goes through Greg is really helpful.
Is there anybody else who would like to give public comment tonight? All right, seeing none, I'm going to close public comment at 8 o'clock. And again, just express my gratitude to the staff who helped pull this presentation together tonight, as well as Kathleen from Smith Group for walking us through this and being a fantastic expert partner and guiding us through this process with particularly changeover in staff. I know that's been hard for you and Smith Group particularly, so I understand and appreciate your patience. And then to Councilman Polika, it's a lot of work being on council, but boy, is it a lot of work to be on the Planning Commission as the council rep during a master plan update. So thank you so much for all of your input and everybody giving input here tonight. We're near the end, and I thought this was a great, fruitful conversation. And with that, I'm calling it at 8:02. Thanks, everybody.
Yes.